Hello, I'm your host Dustin, and welcome to this special presentation of heavy metal history. In this mini doc, we're going to cover the 80s war on heavy metal. It's a moment in heavy metal history in 1985 where three men of different musical genres, but with similar beliefs of artistic expression, came together against the government to save the genre. It was a time where a series of disparate yet eerily linked events leading up to this moment were a volatile mixture of violence and, quote, evil, which would create a pressure cooker of conservatism to try and stifle the genre and its evolution by blaming a litany of pop culture influences as satanic in nature, and therefore needed to be suppressed and censored. Please be warned, there will be discussion of events that involve suicide, murder, and other violent topics in this video. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Satan.
Great Satan. The great Satan.
The great Satan.
For the devil.
Satan. The devil.
Lucifer was Satan. Satan is dead.
Satan. Hell.
Satan was devil.
Satan has devil worshippers.
Satan has always had the best tune.
Like to listen to heavy metal?
Mr. Satan. Devil.
And the devil himself.
The devil himself.
Satan.
Satan?
I'm the devil.
I am the devil.
Thank you to Satan and the devil himself.
Don't believe in any of that stuff.
Choosing a specific moment in time of where to begin is kind of impractical. You know, the truth is things have been deemed satanic since the invention of religion, but for the sake of this timeline and this video, we're going to start in 1969. Charles Manson and his cult would be a catalyst for this satanic resurgence by going on a one-night murder rampage and the now infamous murder of Sharon Tate, her unborn child, along with lifelong friend Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, and Wojciech Fiorsky. These murders were infused with cryptic writings of the murder scenes in what on the surface looked like whispers of satanic rituals. But in reality, it was more to incite racial and socio-political violence by preying on the innocent and wealthy. These murders that made sure that ritualized evil didn't seem that far-fetched. Now, continuing this progression into the 1970s, Satan definitely became all the rage in pop culture and media. In 1971, author William Peter Blatty's novel The Exorcist is a story of a girl being demonically possessed and the battle to save her soul. The book would become a massive success and sweep the nation even further in 1973 with its film adaptation, directed by William Friedkin. It's a film that would be extremely controversial, and it would change the landscape of horror films for decades to come. Now, The Exorcist was the cascade effect for the horror genre to begin utilizing religious and satanic symbolism alike. The continuing undercurrent of films from the 70s like Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, and the Amityville Horror would all utilize occult-infused paranormal events to make the stories seem more legitimate. Now, due to the prevalence of these films and notable figures like Anton LaVey and Aleister Crowley, the general public would be more susceptible to believing stories involving Satanism. Now, at the same time, in the late 1970s, music was evolving at a rapid pace, and from this evolution, an emerging sonic maelstrom was being unleashed into the world. A sound that was edgier, louder, more abrasive, and kinetic than anything that had come before it. The band unknowingly shaping the evolution of the genre was Black Sabbath. They would establish and define the very sonic essence of a new genre by utilizing a tritone riff, which is often referred to as the Devil's Chord. Their songs are written with lyrics that were from the point of view of Lucifer and would also employ occult imagery weaved throughout the words. Now, there has been this stigma that's been entrenched in heavy metal genre since its inception, that these bands and individuals actually worship and idolize Satan. Now, this stems from the imagery and lyrical content portrayed by the bands that would be nothing more than a surface-level gimmick for 99% of these acts. Most heavy metal and punk ideologies of musicians have always relied on counterculture ideas, where the predominant ones have been occult and satanic worship amalgamated for shock value to facilitate the anti-religious and anti-establishment ethos. It was a gimmick to sell more records in most cases, and it always worked. Now, the outrage and vilification of satanic imagery didn't just hit the heavy metal genre. Metal-adjacent interests such as horror films, Dungeons & Dragons, and later into the 90s Magic the Gathering would come under heavy scrutiny from parental groups and the government alike over the years. These interests were seen as an aspersion to the moral character of a person and a threat to society at large by some groups. But in 1982, a woman named Patricia Pulling would start a crusade against Dungeons & Dragons specifically after her son committed suicide, starting a group called BADD, which stood for Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons.
The game of Dungeons & Dragons has been around since the early 70s. It's played by an estimated 5 million people. It is also the target of a group of concerned parents in the United States who call themselves BAD, B-A-D-D, Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons. The reason they are bothered is because they believe the game has been involved in a number of murders and suicides across the United States and now in Canada. At the trial of a 14-year-old boy who admitted to strangling a young Orangeville, Ontario girl and her brother, it was revealed the accused had been playing the game for 18 months, had in fact been a dungeon master of his own group for 5 months.
Dungeon Master and Dwarven Sword Master, Hobgoblins, Dwarves, Elves, and Halflings are some of the characters and terms used in this very complicated and controversial game. We'll talk about the controversy in a moment, but first this report by Carol Jerome, who went to one of the games of the Toronto Dungeons & Dragons Club.
It's a fantasy role-playing game, and it's a refined version of the pretend games we all play as kids. The books tell how to play, describing all the kinds of characters the player can be, and the monsters that will be met on each imaginary adventure. Some players, like these boys, like to make up their own fantasy voyages. There's no board or pieces, it's all in the imagination.
And you find 6 skeletons on the ground. What do?
Daniel Green is the dungeon master who guides the play.
Can I do something?
Yeah, hold.
I have 2 wishes. I'm gonna wish that the door opens.
In this game, for example, Oli plays the role of a cavalier named Fallinger Bandrask. Mike is a fighter, and Erwin is a paladin.
If we're gonna go the other way. We're gonna go the other way. Okay, let's try the other corridor. Oh, okay.
The dungeon master takes them through a strange castle this time, and they must respond to each situation he describes according to their characters, all of whom have prescribed qualities of strength and wisdom, certain powers and magic. When they encounter dragons and other evils, the battle is decided by an intricate scoring system and by these special dice.
And you missed. You see what looks to be a beautiful way to escape. You can just go straight down this corridor and go outside.
I'm gonna walk out.
You're gonna walk out. A black exit out of the game. You don't have to die. It went into another multi-universe, no longer existing. Failure is permanently, forever destroyed. You don't hold me, just expect the same return that got to save my life sometimes. You just got wiped out.
Okay.
It is not only the violence in the fantasies, but the quasi-religious character of the game, with mystic figures who use holy water and magic spells, all woven in arcane language like a secret society, that gives this game a special quality that captivates players and worries some others. But the boys say it's just a game for them, an exciting voyage of imagination.
5.
Not quite. What's your strength?
The manufacturer makes some interesting notes on this. It warns the players not to get themselves confused with their character roles, and it says that the point of this game is not winning and it's not killing, it's having the adventure. Each player wins by having fun, says the manual, so if you can have a good time, you win. You can have fun even if your character gets killed, and if that happens, don't worry. You can always make up another one. For Midday, I'm Carol Jerome in Toronto.
So for the next section of this, we're going to focus on a little game called Dungeons & Dragons.
Be some kind of Dungeons and Dragons game.
Believe it or not, you can learn spells right out of Dungeons & Dragons. Kids will learn them from the Ouija board.
John's slide into Satanism began with his obsession with the fantasy role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. Little did he know that months later he would be drinking blood in front of his schoolmates.
Dungeons & Dragons was blamed for a litany of murders and crimes during its early years. One such story that kind of kicked off this deluge of anti-D&D sentiment came in 1979 when James Dallas Egbert III, who was considered a computer prodigy, began attending Michigan State University when he was 16. After a year of attending college when he was about 17, he apparently left his dorm room one night in August of 1979. The university he was attending has an underground steam tunnel system where James would walk around supposedly to spend time thinking he would go there to kill himself. Now, Egbert had left a suicide note in his dorm room and then went missing for a few weeks until his parents contacted a private investigator named William Deere. He would eventually be found and went back home, but left again and would tragically die of a self-inflicted gunshot wound a year after his initial disappearance. Now, Egbert was in fact a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, a bit of personal history that was reported widely in news coverage during his disappearance and after his death. But also in 1980, around the time of Egbert's tragic death, a book was released called Michelle Remembers. It purported to recount the story of Michelle Smith, who said she remembered childhood sexual abuse that involved satanic rituals. Now, this was another incident in a long line of grifting in the name of Satan. Michelle Remembers was discredited along with recovered memory therapy. It was the method that was used to bring Michelle Smith's memories back to her. Now, there's a documentary on this subject that goes more in depth called Satan Wants You, which is streaming on Tubi. But it's important to note that these incidents happened around the same time with various blame of satanic rituals. But in 1981, novelist Rona Jaffe published a book called Mazes and Monsters, which, along with a 1982 TV movie featuring Tom Hanks, is a fictionalized version of the James Dallas Egbert III story. But it would sustain the streak of fixation about the game due to the similarities of the real-life incident. The film itself amounts to nothing more than fear-mongering propaganda. And in 1984, 5 years after the tragic event of Egbert's suicide, the private investigator that was hired, William Deere, also writes and publishes a book titled The Dungeon Master: The Disappearance of James Dallas Egbert III. The book exaggerated upon the theory that Egbert did play, or at least intended to play, D&D in the steam tunnels, weaponizing the hobby in the name of sensationalism. Later, Deere would conclude that there was never a conclusive link between Egbert's death and D&D established by any investigation. So, the Satanic Panic itself would surely be discredited after countless hoaxes and sensationalist disinformation, right? Well, unfortunately, no. It's all too easy to blame one book, one TV movie, one album, one band, and Hollywood for these events, instead of talking about the effects of mental illness or reducing real-life tragedies to continue perpetuating the Satanic Panic to pervert it further into shock value that parents and conservatives thrive off of, further fueling this Luciferian machine that supposedly is spreading its moral decay across the youth of the times. But the book and movie did exactly that. It kept the idea of, quote, dangerous and, quote, satanic activities among young people in the public consciousness for years to come. Further events in the rest of the 80s would only compound these issues.
Dateline, Northport, Long Island. A quiet community rocked by reports a teenager was dragged through these woods toward a late-night ritual of death. An eyewitness said the victim, Gary Lowers, was forced to pray to Satan as he was repeatedly stabbed to death. 2 young men were arrested. James Troiano was found innocent last month, but his alleged accomplice never made it to trial. Ricky Casso committed suicide in jail the day after his arrest. Despite numerous signs that Casso was into Satanism and rock music associated with devil worship, police steadfastly refused to label this case satanic. The official explanation, a drug-related crime.
In the summer of 1984, another incident, infused with occult and satanic stories and accusations, would occur when 17-year-old drug dealer and self-professed Satanist Ricky Casso murdered his friend Gary Lowers in the woods of Newport, New York, while high on mescaline. Two of friends of Casso's and Lowers who were also present at the crime scene, Jimmy Troiano and Albert Quinones, had told police that Casso commanded Lowers to say, quote, "Say you love Satan," end quote, before he took his life. And Lowers replied with, quote, "I love my mother," unquote. According to the coroner's report, Casso allegedly stabbed his friend 36 times and sliced out his eyes, which led to media spreading that the murder was ritualistic in nature. For weeks following the murder, Casso would lead local teens into the woods to show them the body and brag. He told some that he killed Lauers because Satan told him to. His belief was that the devil had manifested in the form of a black crow, and when its caw coincided with Casso asking if he should take Lauers' life, he interpreted it as Satan's approval. Now, for months afterwards, the media presented Casso as a Satanist who was part of a cult or a group named the Knights of the Black Circle, which was reportedly the name of the sect Casso had been a part of. Although there's no evidence to suggest this as fact, except for a few pieces of alleged graffiti spotted in the areas Casso frequented. The hysteria that was engulfing America would further spread like a contagion with this murder. At the same time, Suffolk County Police sent a press release following the incident, which claimed that Casso regularly partook in rituals honoring the devil. The notion that Casso was a devil worshiper was further backed up by his own father, who claims that his son was obsessed with reading about witchcraft and wearing apparel featuring satanic symbols. The truth of all this, without the obfuscation of satanic assertions, is that Casso was a homeless drug addict at a young age, fleeing his allegedly abusive father and becoming a drug dealer just to survive. Some friends have even suggested he also suffered from severe mental illness, and Casso's drug use, combined with these external factors, facilitated this gruesome outcome. Casso was not mentally well. He was not a byproduct of satanic decrees or demands, but a repercussion of the failure of the American family and the societal stigma about mental health at that time. On the day Casso was arrested, in his now infamous mugshot and arrest photos, he was wearing an AC/DC shirt. Now, Casso was in fact a heavy metal fan, particularly Ozzy Osbourne and Judas Priest, which led to the inevitable association between heavy metal and his transgressions by the media scavengers, religious figures, and distressed parents looking for a place to displace the blame. After his arrest, Casso would kill himself in prison only 48 hours later. A documentary about this whole incident titled The Acid King was made about Casso and his murder of Lauers. It is also streaming on Tubi, and it goes way more in depth through all of this stuff. Now, most notably, throughout different musical genres, there have been bands that have written songs about Casso. One such band in heavy metal is the doom metal band Acid King, which took their name from his supposed posthumous moniker, and have written multiple songs about this as well. Testament and Skid Row have also notably written songs inspired by Casso's callous act. But it wasn't the only heinous and reviled event to be linked with heavy music and the artist making it. Something we'll cover later is the trial of Judas Priest and Ozzy Osbourne and what is called backmasking.
Is connected to devil worship. That's the focus tonight of Lonnie Lardner's special report on Satanism. But we want to warn you now that some things you're about to see and hear might be too graphic for children. Lonnie.
Well, Terry, authorities tell us that the most serious or perhaps the most dangerous kind of devil worship comes in the form of underground cults. Most of them are very secretive, usually organizing clandestine rituals in the dark of night. Well, those ceremonies sometimes involve the sharing of animal blood to gain power, they say, but cult members believe their strength really comes from secrecy.
There's secrecy that keeps us powerful.
And power, according to this man, is what true Satanists are guaranteed. Police and Sheriff's Department investigators say satanic cults often find that power in animal sacrifice. Photographs support their theory, and some self-proclaimed devil worshippers tout it.
The animal would bleed to death. It was painless because the knife was always very sharp, if you could cut it right. And the animal would remain alive for several minutes as long as the blood drained out of the jugular vein.
And then what?
Well, the ritual would work itself up to a frenzy in a head, and hopefully by the time all the emotion was spent out of the human beings, the animal was dead.
The most common thing in an adolescent murderer, for example, is having been abused, having been sexually molested or assaulted as a child. And very often these youngsters will turn that around and assault little children or animals. They'll torture, torment, kill.
When kids will do their sacrificing and their animal mutilation, they'll do it within a pentagram. They'll put black candles on each of the points of the pentagram, a grill over the top, and allow the blood to drip into some kind of container because they use it for bathing in or drinking.
Contrary to popular belief of Satanists being animal killers, we believe that animals and small children are the highest form of magic, and therefore it would be completely sacrilegious to harm these beings.
This man says he joined an underground satanic cult after a lifetime of having religion shoved down his throat. He says animal sacrifice took him to a higher place.
When you've got people looking at you like you're a god, you know, and your parents treated you like, it does feel good. It gives you a feeling of power.
Tomorrow night, what drew that cult member to worship the devil and why many youngsters develop a need to control or hurt. Paul.
The rest of pop culture during this time would continue to evolve, and much like the films of the 70s did echoing into the 80s, horror films would once again be the arbiter of this symbolism. Reverberating new societal anxieties, these films would still be infused with the connotation of satanic possession, but now heavy metal was the root cause of all this evil and violence. Films like Black Roses.
If rock and roll is the devil's music, then Black Roses is the house band.
Because we have had no corrupting influences here to speak of, until now. And now we find that disciples of the devil are invading our town and threatening to steal our children away from us. Yes, their image alone has become a symbol of evil to our young. Their satanic music and subversive lyrics threaten to undermine the very fabric of our society.
Trick or Treat, Rock and Roll Nightmare, and Hard Rock Zombies, taken at face value, would send any overprotective parent into a tailspin with its content. Now, in the film Trick or Treat specifically, it's about a bully teenager metalhead that summons his favorite rock star, the iconic Sammy Kerr, after his untimely death. What he does is he plays the last remaining copy of this album backwards, which, funny enough, was given to him by a character that Gene Simmons plays. He then, under the duress of Kerr, takes revenge on his bullies, which culminates into one of the best scenes, where Kerr is resurrected and dishes out an extremely catchy hair metal song while blowing people in the crowd away with a literal electric guitar. It fucking rules. Now, these types of stories and films with warnings to not play records backwards or falling into possession of the devil and demons alike seemingly preyed on the exploitation of this current moral panic. But in reality, most of the filmmakers were extremely aware of this notion and were actually satirizing these ridiculous notions of the devil permeating our society and the youth alike. The media has always been a tool for warping the facts into whatever sensationalist story or headline is more aligned to the narrative they want to achieve. News and media thrive on exacerbating these issues with a deluge of news stories using suggestive headlines to seize a reader's attention. In an excerpt from a 1989 article in a Pennsylvania newspaper which read, quote, "Most teens who became involved with Satan worship only dabble in it. They are mostly enthralled by the symbols, the clothing, and the heavy metal music," end quote.
We would like to classify them as the dabblers.
They're dabblers.
Dabblers.
The kid who kind of dabbles around in this
The
stuff.
most high-profile media personality to ensure more rapturous damage and further escalate the Satanic Panic was Geraldo Rivera. In 1988, a Rivera shock doc called Devil Worship: Exposing Satan's Underground aired, which unjustifiably took aim at metalheads and depicted them as blood-drinking, grave-robbing, irreverent heathens. His claim was that more than 1 million Satanists formed a, quote, highly organized, very secretive network across the United States. The documentary went on to discuss a series of murders involving young people linked with alleged devil worship. The most prominent of them all was a case of Thomas Sullivan, a 14-year-old who stabbed his mother to death, and just so happened to be a fan of Black Sabbath. This scapegoating would be a common theme among the crimes of this nature that Rivera used for his biased framework. Ozzy Osbourne himself would appear as a guest via satellite on this doc, and when asked about the connection between his music and a number of the crimes that had been mentioned, before he can even attempt to explain with any substantial reasoning, he was more or less cut off.
Let's go to London for a quick exchange with Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy, I'm glad you're on the program. I'll interview you in greater detail in a couple of minutes. The one thing I have to ask you now, though, is, of course, the vast majority of your fans and the fans of heavy metal music are not Satanists. But there is no doubt, at least not in our reporting, that heavy metal music plays a role. Every single kid whose case we know about, who committed a violent act in Satan's name, was also into heavy metal music. What's your response to that, Ozzy?
Well, I don't really know. All I do is make music. You know, I don't sit down and purposely plan to freak everybody out. I mean, I always have played heavy metal music. I suppose when I was younger and I started writing songs, my world was kind of dark and dingy. You know, I came from a working class family. I had nothing, no dough, no prospect of ever having much money, and so that's how I saw the world as a child. So, not all my songs are about Satanism.
Of course.
In fact, if you
stand by, Ozzy, because I want to get to Shorn Sellers, who's the youngest kid ever to go on death row. Ozzy.
Yeah?
I know that your lyrics are less excessive than groups like Slayer or Venom or Iron Maiden or some of the others, but still, for some reason, maybe it's because you've been around for so long, I see tattoos of your name on some of these teenage devil worshippers' arms. Wherever I see devil graffiti and satanic graffiti, I see your name also. Do you feel a sense of responsibility, Oz?
The only responsibility I feel is the fact that I'm a true musician in what I play. I don't want to make anybody start doing all this devil worship crap, because that's not my intention. Although I have sang on a few songs about the devil, you know, that's about it. You know, I don't want anyone to harm themselves.
What about the issue of responsibility? What about the whole thing about guilt? Do you feel responsible?
I don't feel guilty. I feel kind of persecuted by everybody because I'm not a bad guy. My intentions are not to harm anyone. In fact, it's directly the opposite. Like when people come to my concerts, I want them to have a good, fun evening out, you know. And it seems to me that a lot of people judge the book by the cover more. So they write things about me, well, they don't even know what they're talking about, you know.
Well, there are lots of people out there, lots of people here in our studio audience who have a very different point of view. We'll get to them coming up next. A look into the dark soul of Satanism. Stay with us.
Other interviews from the documentary were quoted as saying, quote, "When I listened to heavy metal, images would go through my head," end quote. One teenager who was interviewed said, quote, "I could see me hurting someone, torturing people," end quote. Now, Rivera, in all his unfettered hubris, predicted that, quote, "Within 18 months, teenagers involved in Satanism would be as epidemic as drugs were a decade ago. These kids are going to be the heart of darkness." The 2-hour special would go on to draw huge ratings, despite the obviously inaccurate and dubious journalism it presented. And in 1995, Geraldo would give a half-hearted, feigned apology on the subject and the fear it injected into the world, but notably not really taking any accountability whatsoever in the spreading of the disinformation. This is something Rivera has had to do multiple times throughout his career. Now, during this same time, Virginia Commonwealth University published a paper called Cults That Never Were, the Satanic Ritual Abuse Scare, that details the history and evidence of the moral panic that climaxed in the 1980s. They stated that, quote, "Through media involvement and growing panic among concerned citizens, the satanic cult panic grew into a North American pandemic." The university's post notes says, By the mid-1990s, skepticism grew concerning the realities of these allegations, and the rumors were eventually proven false. Virtually no evidence was ever discovered to support the allegations of satanic cult activity, the VCU post said. By 1985, the looming shadow of Satan permeated every facet of life in every home, every school, every television, film, book, and album. Ambiguous reports of ritual sacrifice proliferated, and parents threw away and burned scores of heavy metal, punk, and rock and roll records with as much pageantry as an alleged Satanist performing an occult ritual would in an effort to, quote, protect their children from, quote, evil. Not even Prince or his song Darling Nikki were spared. This period of moral outrage and fear was egged on by the diabolical propaganda of Tipper Gore's Parents Music Resource Center, the PMRC, and their infamous Filthy 15 list, a document that stigmatized 15 seemingly arbitrary chosen songs for their supposed sexual, pro-drug, or occult themes. So what was the Filthy 15? The list of the Filthy 15 are as follows. You had Judas Priest, Eat Me Alive, Motley Crue's Bastard, Prince, Darling Nikki, Sheena Easton, Sugar Walls, Wasp, Animal, Fuck Like a Beast, Merciful Fate, Into the Coven, Vanity, Strap On Robbie Baby, Def Leppard, High and Dry, Twisted Sister, We're Not Gonna Take It, Madonna, Dress You Up, Cyndi Lauper, She Bop, AC/DC, Let Me Put My Love Into You, Black Sabbath, Trashed, Mary Jane Girls, My House, and Venom, Possessed. Even just looking at this list, you can see the arbitrary nature of everything they picked, basing it entirely on what they deemed violent or sexual in nature. I mean, how could Cyndi Lauper be anywhere near as satanic as the band Venom? How can Madonna be anywhere near as satanic as Black Sabbath? And the answer is none of them. It's just what they felt they needed to use as a scapegoat, and this was the 15 songs they chose as examples leading into the trial of the PMRC, which we're now going to get into.
That the occult uses in their recruiting and in their manipulation. There are 8 of them. Heavy metal music, videos, fantasy role-playing games, comic books, sex, power that is reflected by symbols of power, cartoons, and drugs. First of all, there's heavy metal music, and I am going to tell you that heavy metal music is probably the most effective tool the occult has ever used in recruiting young people and to get their message across. Now I know some of you say, well, wait a minute, you are merely bad rapping heavy metal music. Not only heavy metal music, but death metal music, which is a coming phenomenon among young people today. Let me just tell you that I believe that heavy metal music is music from the dark side for 3 reasons. I could give you many, but just 3 reasons. Number 1, because the occult says so. And then another reason I believe is because heavy metal artists themselves say that they are Satanists and occult members and involved in not just Satanism, but some other cults. The young artist you're looking at now is involved in voodoo. And then I'm going to give you the 3rd reason a little bit later on. But going to Ozzy Osbourne with his teeth showing and his blazing personality promotes Satanism in more ways than one. Iron Maiden, another group that promotes Satanism. Warfare with their symbols of demons and snakes with demonic heads on them on their album covers. And here's a heavy metal artist hanging on a cross with a goat head in mockery of the death of the Lord Jesus Christ. Kiss and Rip now doing concerts together, and this is one of their promotional posters, and at their own admission they say that they are a match made in hell, and I couldn't agree with them more because their music is certainly demonic. Hell Awaits, another fantastic song that is loved and revered by the heavy metal artists put out by Slayer. This particular album is found in a lot of of teenage suicide scenes. Another Slayer album, Wasp, is another one of the popular groups that promote Satanism. Of course, King Diamond, and I you know what, you've got to give this guy credit, because he openly says, I am a Satanist. My music is for Satan, and my concerts are for Satan, and if you don't like it, then don't come to my concerts and don't buy my album, because I am a Satanist. He makes no bones about it. AC/DC are a blood cult. Ozzy Osbourne promotes not only the occult, but he also promotes drugs with the use of some of his posters, where it says, just say Ozzy, and down at the bottom it says, and don't take no for an answer. This is a tabloid put out by the heavy metal industry. Wasp, AC/DC, Motley Crue, all identified as blood cults. Venom with the pentagram. Black Sabbath with the demon on the front of the album. Another album cover and that was converted into a poster with a woman hanging on a cross and the demons there. And Mother, Daddy, Grandma, Grandpa, how would you like for your daughter to bring this gentleman home for dinner? Now you laugh about that, but let me tell you something. Did you know that every time they bring his music home, they are bringing him home? You see, the young people are being taught by these heavy metal artists. Their belief system is being pumped into their brain by these heavy metal artists. And somebody's going to teach your children. And this is who you're allowing to teach your children. This is who they're listening to. Diary of a Madman with the upside down cross, Ozzy Osbourne.
Motley Crue, Prince, ZZ Top. These are a few of the rock musicians criticized by Tennessee Senator Albert Gore's wife, Tipper. Mrs. Gore has joined forces with state and national PTA members to combat what she considers sexually explicit and violent lyrics.
Our songs about glorifying incest, there's songs about rape, thrill killing, sadomasochism. There's a song that goes, quote, not a woman but a whore, I can taste the hate. Well, now I'm killing you, watch your face turning blue, unquote. By a group that has sold 2 million copies of that particular album. They're very popular with young kids. Recording studios voluntarily responded to the campaign against heavy metal songs so that parents can see what their kids are buying. Many records now contain sexually explicit warnings on the label. The labels merely read, parental advisory, explicit lyrics, but area teachers regard that as a major step toward reducing some of the influence the words are having on our youth. But Tipper Gore and PTA members say those words cross the line between sensuality and hardcore sexuality that young people should not be exposed to.
Explicitness. It is like going to a porno movie and seeing everything, only it's a porno hearing session. And the kids are hearing everything.
Mary Elizabeth Gore says she was shocked at what she was hearing. Gore is the mother of 4 and the wife of a United States Senator. She's joined with other influential women to form the Parents Music Resource Center.
Well, my 11-year-old likes Prince. However, on the album Purple Rain, there is a song called Darling Nikki, which deals with the subject of masturbation, and that is in the lyrics. I did not feel that was appropriate for my then 10-year-old child to have purchased.
Like Gore's group, the National PTA is asking record companies to voluntarily label records, tapes, and cassettes that may be considered obscene. While the parents' groups are calling for voluntary restraint, some in the industry fear encroachment on the First Amendment.
I'm very concerned that we're talking about some form of censorship here, which I absolutely do not believe in.
A recent hit of Sheena Easton's called Sugar Walls about sexual arousal was yanked from several radio stations.
If there is to be censorship, then it should be in the home, and that's where it should start, and that's where it should end.
The Parents Music Resource Center was founded in May 1985. The group's formation was cemented with the financial help of Mike Love of the Beach Boys and Joseph Coors, the owner of Coors Beers. Both had actively supported Reagan's candidacy, and course offered offices to the PMRC. Surely no conflict of interest was there at all. Now, the committee was founded by 4 women known as the Washington Wives, a reference to their husbands' connections with the government in Washington, D.C. area. The women who founded the PMRC are Tipper Gore, wife of Senator and later Vice President Al Gore.
I'm cereal. I'm super cereal. Everyone will say, "Thank you, Al Gore. You're super awesome."
Susan Baker, wife of Treasury Secretary James Baker. Pam Hauer, wife of Washington realtor Raymond Hauer. And Sally Nevius, wife of former Washington City Council Chairman John Nevius. Gore and her fellow Washington wives sought to save the children from raunch and sleaze by instituting a mandatory rating system. As their crusade intensified, rock and metal music itself came under fire, and in doing so, 3 unlikely allies would defend music and free speech in front of a Senate committee.
But what does rock music really and truly say? This is my 3rd reason. There is a very popular organization that is secular, and it is not a Christian organization. It is not a bunch of Bible-thumping fundamentalists who holler and scream, but there is an organization known as the Parents Music Resource Center, secular organization. They paid a great deal of money to have psychiatrists and psychologists research heavy metal lyrics. Here are some lyrics, for example, the title of which is Kill Yourself. Kill yourself. And when you get all the way down to the chorus, it says, kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself. Now I'm going to admit to you that if an emotionally stable young person listens to that, they're not going to run out and commit suicide. However, a lot of young people are not emotionally stable. When they're having problems and they listen to music like this, then they end up committing suicide. And this is what the Parents Music Resource Center was saying. And as a result of the study that was done by the Parents Resource Center, there were 5 conclusions drawn by the secular psychiatrists and psychologists. Now, these 5 secular psychiatrists said heavy metal music reflects, number 1, the abuse of drugs and alcohol, number 2, encourages suicide, number 3, it has graphic violence, number 4, heavy metal music has a fascination with the occult, and number 5, it has a sexuality that is graphic and explicit. I agree with them 100%. Listen to the sights and the sounds of this particular heavy metal song.
The hearing was held on September 19th, 1985, when representatives from the PMRC and 3 musicians mentioned earlier, along with Senators Paula Hawkins, Al Gore, and others, testified before the Senate Commerce, Science and Transportation Committee on, quote, the subject of the content of certain sound recordings and suggestions that recording packages be labeled to provide a warning to prospective purchasers of sexually explicit or other potentially offensive content. This would evolve into something we'll get into later that you all know and love on the front of your records. With the stage set and the Senate hearings beginning, one supporting witness was Paula Hawkins. During her testimony, she presented 3 record covers. They were Pyromania by Def Leppard, WOW by Wendy O. Williams, and Wasp by Wasp. And she also presented music videos for Hot for a Teacher by Van Halen and We're Not Gonna Take It by Twisted Sister, commenting, quote, much has changed since Elvis's seemingly innocent times. And to note, Elvis also underwent a ton of scrutiny in his day for sexually suggestive dance moves, making this comparison not only absurd, but completely misinformed. She continues though, saying, subtleties, suggestions, and innuendo have given way to overt expressions and descriptions of often violent sexual acts, drug taking, and flirtations with the occult. The record album covers to me are self-explanatory. The next supporting witness was Susan Baker, and she testified that there are certainly many causes for these ills in our society, but it is our contention that the pervasive messages aimed at children which promote and glorify suicide, rape, sadomasochism, and so on have to be numbered among contributing factors. Tipper Gore asked record companies to voluntarily place a warning label on music products inappropriate for younger children due to explicit sexual or violent lyrics. National PTA Vice President for Legislative Activity, Millie Waterman, related the PTA's role in the debate and proposed printing the symbol R on the cover of recordings containing explicit sexual languages, violence, profanity, the occult, and glorification of drugs and alcohol, and providing lyrics for R-labeled albums, much like how in Hollywood, anything rated R is for adults. In addition, Dr. Joe Stussy, a music professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio, spoke regarding the power of music to influence behavior. He argued that heavy metal was different from earlier forms of music such as jazz and rock and roll because it was, quote, church music, and that heavy metal had as one of its central elements the element of hatred. Dr. Paul King, a child and adolescent psychiatrist, testified on the deification of heavy metal musicians and to the presentation of heavy metal as a religion. He also stated that many adolescents read deeply into song lyrics. Once the opposition was called to defend themselves, an unlikely trio of 3 men, all from completely different genres of music, would align their views against the PMRC. All with persuasive, eloquent, and often colorful yet assertive arguments defending not just their music, but their peers' music as well. Those defenders of free speech and art were Frank Zappa, John Denver, and the man himself, Dee Snider. Now, musician and producer Frank Zappa, during his statement, asserted that the PMRC proposal is an ill-conceived piece of nonsense which fails to deliver any real benefits to children, infringes the civil liberties of people who are not children, and promises to keep the courts busy for years dealing with the interpretational and enforcemental problems inherent in the proposal's design. He went on to state his suspicion that the hearings were a front for H.R. 2911, a proposed blank tape tax, saying that the major record labels need to have H.R. 2911 whiz through a few committees before anybody smells a rat. One of them is chaired by Senator Thurmond. Is it a coincidence that Mrs. Thurmond is affiliated with the PMRC? Zappa had earlier stated about the Senate's agreement to hold a hearing on the matter that a couple of blowjobs here and there and bingo, you get a hearing. Now, when John Denver came up to give his speech, many expected him to side with the PMRC. Folk rock musician John Denver referred to the proposed labels as censorship and stated he was strongly opposed to censorship of any kind in our society or anywhere in the world, and that in his experience, censors often misinterpret music, as was the case with his song Rocky Mountain High. He further compared the PMRC proposals to Nazi book burnings and expressed his belief that censorship is ultimately counterproductive, saying, quote, "That which is denied becomes that which is most desired, and that which is hidden becomes that which is most interesting. Consequently, a great deal of time and energy is spent trying to get at what is being kept from you." Now, when Dee took the microphone, he would unknowingly become the face of this battle of words against the PMRC. One of the most famous photos from the hearing shows Snider at the desk, as shown on the screen here. His intensity is palpable, and it would be permeated throughout his entire speech to the PMRC. Dee Snider was the frontman and lead singer of the heavy metal band Twisted Sister. He testified that he did not support RIAA President Gordakov's unnecessary and unfortunate decision to agree to a so-called generic label on some selected records.
Take the Saturday. Take the Saturday. Snyder, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here. I don't know if it's morning or afternoon. I'll say both. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is D. Snyder. That's S-N-I-D-E-R. I have been asked to come here to present my views on, quote, the subject of the content of certain sound recordings and suggestions that recording packages be labeled to provide a warning to prospective purchasers of sexually explicit or other potentially offensive content, unquote.
Like John Denver, Snyder felt that his music had been misinterpreted. He defended the Twisted Sister songs Under the Blade, which had been interpreted by the PMRC as referring to sadomasochism, bondage, and rape, and We're Not Gonna Take It, which the PMRC accused of promoting violence. Snyder told the panel that Under the Blade was inspired by a band member's surgery and was about the fear he imagined one would experience undergoing surgery, announcing, quote,
Ms. Gore claimed that one of my songs, Under the Blade, had lyrics encouraging sadomasochism, bondage, and rape. The lyrics she quoted have absolutely nothing to do with these topics. On the contrary, the words in question are about surgery and the fear that it instills in people. Furthermore, the reader of this article is led to believe that the three lines she quotes go together in the song, when, as you can see from reading the lyrics, the first two lines she cites are an edited phrase from the second verse, and the third line is a misquote of a line from the chorus. That the writer could misquote me is curious, since we make it a point to print all our lyrics on the inner sleeve of every album.
He further stated Miss Gore was looking for sadomasochism and bondage, and she found it. Someone looking for surgical references would have found it as well. Snyder concluded that, quote, the full responsibility for defending my children falls on the shoulders of my wife and I, because there is no one else capable of making these judgments for us. Now, during this time, other artists would also show their support of D and his defiant stance against the PMRC. Here's one such person right now.
PMRC are like the McCarthy era in America. People are scared of them. But what nobody seems to realize is that if you wouldn't be scared of them, they couldn't do anything.
Polish.
Do you realize that, for Christ's sake? How can radio stations broadcasting across the country be scared of a bunch of assholes like the PMRC? And what do you really think they're going to stop? They tried to stop Elvis Presley from every pulpit in America. They burned Beatles records in public in Alabama in the 60s because John Lennon said that they were more popular than Jesus. The fact that it was true had nothing to do with it. But it was only because people would do it that they could pick up that shit and burn it. You understand?
Nobody was frightened of him.
In Hollywood in the 40s, in the 50s, McCarthy, Red's under the bed, and better dead than red and all of that shit. People in Hollywood were informing on each other, friends, right? Putting somebody else in the fucking hot seat because then they wouldn't be, and saying, I'm not a communist. But the motherfucker couldn't have done a damn thing, man. If everybody would not have been running around shit scared of him. And I think it's disgraceful. I mean, I hate to say that England is ever better than America, because usually it isn't, but in that case it is. These people would get laughed off the face of the fucking earth in England. I can't understand it.
They wouldn't last 2 days in England.
I cannot understand it. I just don't believe that anybody could attach any importance to what a bunch of shitheads like that have to say about anything.
Now, with this being a congressional issue in the US, what about bands and records that were being sold overseas and foreign acts? Could the US somehow penalize and ban their records as well? Well, the short answer is no. The heavy metal genre overseas did not even be affected by all this at all. They heard stories of it, and D. Snyder, appearing as a witness to defend the art. All the bands that were on the Filthy 15, like King Diamond and Venom, they weren't even aware that their lyrics were being brought before the US Senate. So, compounding on the fact that in the 80s, these were underground metal bands on independent labels that weren't even that easy to find in North America, if at all. And when you read interviews with bands like Venom today, they call it a silly little footnote in their histories of pissing people off. Eventually, though, on November 1st, 1985, before the hearing ended, the RIAA agreed to put a parental advisory labels on selected releases at their own discretion. The labels were generic, unlike the original idea of a descriptive label categorizing the explicit lyrics. This is the origin of the much maligned, yet now iconic bane of every underage kid trying to buy a record without their parents' permission, the parental advisory sticker. Many stores refuse to sell albums containing the label, most notably Walmart, and others limited sales of those albums to adults only. Now, this event, due to the less than ideal outcome, can be seen as a futile endeavor and somewhat of a loss for those that defied the PMRC. But it was a win, because the censorship that could have resulted if the PMRC won would have had far-reaching consequences that could still be in effect to this day had Frank, John, and Dee not banded together. Now, it is uncertain whether what has colloquially become dubbed the tipper sticker is effective at preventing children from being exposed to explicit content. Some, citing the forbidden fruit effect, suggest that the sticker in fact increases record sales. Philip Bailey of Earth, Wind & Fire has said that, quote, "For the most part, the sticker might even sell more records in some areas. All you gotta do is tell somebody this is a no-no, and that's what they want to go see." Ice-T famously wrote a track called Freedom of Speech, which contains some lyrics we'll put on the screen here, while lyrics from the Furnace Face song We Love You Tipper Gore from their 1991 album Just Buy It suggested that the label only whets my appetite, only makes us want to hear it that much more. So with these events in hindsight, that would surely solve the problem with music and heavy metal being crucified and demonized now. The genre could finally thrive and exist alongside other popular music acts and become mainstream now. Well, unfortunately not.
Heavy metal. What do you think of it?
I don't know what anybody sees in it. Sounds like a dog fight.
I'd watch MTV all the time if there was no heavy metal.
Doesn't turn me on. I just can't understand what they're saying and I can't get into it.
It's fast, it's powerful, it's distorted, it's obnoxious metal. That's all I listen to.
For him, there's Headbangers Ball late Saturday night.
MTV should definitely play less heavy metal.
The votes are in and we're listening. We're now playing less heavy metal and more of your favorite music. It's that simple.
That same day, in 1985, a lawsuit was filed against Ozzy Osbourne in the suicide death of John Daniel McCollum. Simultaneously, during this time, another unfortunate suicide attempt would also see Judas Priest be implicated under the same accusations that heavy metal told them to do it. It's these two cases happen almost concurrently during this time, not long after the PMRC incident. But before we get into those final cases, the evidence that was used to try and convict these artists was a thing called backmasking. So let's go over what backmasking is to have some more clarity over these events and what Ozzy and Priest were being accused of.
Satan sells. No matter how you slice it, it's not the heavy metal bands like Black Sabbath and Kiss that are losing money in the current record industry depression. In fact, some new groups seem to be picking up that satanic smell of success and following along in its path.
I think that within the rock music field, you've got people who really are into the occult and into Satan. And then you've got some who probably are playing games, but no matter how you cut it, they're propagating Satan. They're propagating the demonic line, the occultic world. And I think it's a devastating thing on our culture.
Is this a ridiculous notion, or is Satan rampant in rock? To some, the answer is obvious. Skull-headed monsters and demon-like figures are probably the most blatant. Then there is the upside-down cross, depicting a mockery of Jesus Christ. There is, of course, the sign of Satan. And there is the number 666, also known as the mark of the beast, the symbol belonging to the Antichrist, who, the Bible tells us, is Satan. But in May of 1982, teenagers of a congregation in Topeka, Kansas, destroyed thousands of dollars worth of records and tapes, which they felt contained the message of Satan. The Christian Concern sheds light on a more secular aspect of music listening. It's what you don't hear. Government investigation has found subliminal messages on certain albums when played in reverse. A bill now before Congress would require warning labels on those records containing backward masking.
And that way, young people that don't want this kind of material, whether it's political messages that Reagan is a great guy, or whether it has anything to do with Satan or Charlie Chan, they're not going to have to listen to it. Parents who go out to buy their kids the Teeny Boppers record albums during the Christmas period, they will see the warning label.
What I've done here is queued up this song. It's called Fire on High from the ELO Face the Music album. And I wouldn't have known about it. I mean, I've played this record a million times, and I've heard that, you know what tape sounds like when it's running backwards. I've heard that there's something in here backwards, but I've never felt moved to put it on tape and run it backwards and see what it says. Well, it's real easy, this particular record, to just take your hand and go like this, and we'll hear what it says.
The music is reversible, but time. Turn back.
See?
The music is reversible, but time.
Turn back, turn back.
What does that mean?
I think it's a gimmick. I mean, it's not, it doesn't seem too diabolical to me. I think it's just a gimmick.
I think just the very fact that this has gotten some attention may cause record groups to say, hey, rather than get hassled by the feds, let's do all this rotten satanic stuff forward.
People say it's Satanism. You can say we're a religion because when you have 5,000 kids all believing in this band, that is a religion.
It is Satan carrying us further and further and further all the time.
It's, you know, it's selling your soul.
John Daniel McCollum shot and killed himself on October 26, 1984, while lying on his bed listening to an Ozzy Osbourne record at his home in Indio, California. The 19-year-old's parents went on to sue, alleging that the lyrics to Osbourne's song Suicide Solution were a, quote, proximate cause for their son's death. McCollum's father, Jack, has said,
Too much, the Beatles' hair was too long, Prince is obscene. This year, outraged parents even demanded congressional hearings. And in one extreme case, a father says the music, specifically Ozzy Osbourne's heavy metal music, made his son take his life. What you're about to see is Ozzy Osbourne in his music videos and some kids we taped who are heavy metal fans. What you're about to hear is the song Suicide Solution that a grieving father says contributed to his son's death.
Normal kid there who really doesn't show any signs of any depression at all, and happy, and all of a sudden 6 hours he's dead. No one can explain it. The only thing we know is he was listening to this music.
Jack and Jacqueline McCollum's 19-year-old son, John, shot himself in the head the night of October 26, 1984, while listening to the music of Ozzy Osbourne. The police photo shows the headphones were still on when he died.
He had been dead for quite a while when I found him, so it was horrible.
Still pretty fresh in your mind, isn't it?
Yes. You know, there's not a day that goes by that I don't, think about it. And I just kept saying, why? What was the reason, you know? He was fine, and then my daughter was, I was talking to her, and I said, why? Why did he, kill himself? And she said it was the music he listened to, Mom.
When the police arrived at the McCollum's house, they found Osbourne records still on the turntable.
The final song on that side of the record was Suicide Solution, which to me says, made your bed, rest your head, but you lie there and moan. Where to hide? Suicide is the only way out.
Trying to find a clue to his son's death, Jack McCollum has spent hours searching the lyrics of Osbourne's music.
Obviously, growing up in the 80s where mental illness was not taken as serious, parents missed these signs all the time. I'm sure his father, could sit there and say he didn't seem depressed, but really, it's very clear this kid was depressed, and it's very tragic what happened to him. So blaming Ozzy for something like this is completely ridiculous. Now, in an interview, Ozzy has said,
The boy must have been pretty messed up before he ever heard an Ozzy record. And I can't help that, I feel very sad for the boy, and I feel terribly sad for the parents, because as a parent myself, I'd be pretty devastated if something like that happened. But no, and I have thought about this. If the boot was on the other foot, I couldn't blame the artist.
CBS Records wouldn't comment on the suit, but Osbourne's attorney, Howard Weitzman, did.
What happens if you lose?
I think the effect in the industry would be disastrous. I think everybody that writes a song, every actor that speaks a line, every author that writes a piece, every screenwriter that writes a script is going to be looking over their shoulder, afraid that whatever they say could be misinterpreted by some very small percentage of individuals. And the real problem with a case such as this is they have totally misinterpreted what Ozzy meant to say.
What did Ozzy mean to say?
The word suicide solution is meaning suicide as a liquid, like solution as a liquid, not a way out. And the song's about like the dangers of alcoholism, like alcohol will kill her just like any other drug will. It's just wine is fine, but whiskey's quicker, suicide is slow with liquor. And that's easy. It's just a terrible case of misinterpretation as far as I'm concerned.
I don't think that we can prove that Ozzy Osbourne wanted John McCullough to pull the trigger. But the point is that they knew that this record was going to encourage or promote suicide.
Tom Anderson is the McCollum's lawyer. He's also a born-again Christian, one of a growing number who have mounted a campaign against heavy metal music, insisting on its link to the rise in teen suicide.
I've been studying this problem now for a year, and there's a trend, and it's a frightening trend, and I'm concerned about that aspect of it. I think that we have in this case opposing forces of Satan and God.
And I'm not trying to turn people into frogs. There's no backward masking, there's no hidden secret messages at all. It's just a goof-off, it's just entertainment, you know. It's like Ozzy puts his mask on and goes on and does his performance. It's just an art form, my form of art, that's all it is.
If successful, the McCollum lawsuit would have had huge consequences, not just for Osbourne, but for artists in every medium. The creators of any film, television show, book, or piece of music could potentially have been held liable for the actions of those who watched, read, or listened to it. Very overreaching actions that could seriously mess up pop culture in a way we would never recover from. Now, luckily, the case was eventually dismissed by the state of California in 1988, with the court declaring that McCollum's suicide was not a foreseeable result of listening to Ozzy Osbourne's song. Now let's look at what happened with Judas Priest. On August 24th, 1990, just 5 years after the PMRC waged their war on free speech and right as Ozzy would come under scrutiny for backmasking, Judas Priest would also now be under the spotlight for a wrongful death court case. The fear that heavy metal contained lyrics which encouraged people to do bad things was never more prevalent. The incident took place on December 23, 1985. Raymond Belknap, who was 18, and James Vance, who was 20, after a long alcohol and drug binge, made a suicide pact to kill themselves with a shotgun. Where Belknap succeeded, Vance failed to take his own life and blew away the bottom part of his face, leaving him disfigured. Now, Vance would die 3 years later.
Ray's sister described their behavior as getting kind of radical and nasty and violent.
Ken McKenna is the attorney for the boys' families.
They escaped out the bedroom window with a shotgun and went down to the churchyard nearby to the back park where the merry-go-round was. Ray put the gun under his chin, and his last words were, "I sure effed up my life." He blew the shotgun into his head and died instantly.
Then it was James' turn. He picked up the gun and pulled the trigger. James survived, but was severely disfigured. 4 months after the suicide pact, he wrote this letter.
I believe that alcohol and heavy metal music such as Judas Priest led us or even mesmerized us into believing the answer to life was death.
James sent the letter to his dead friend's mother, who then brought it to McKenna.
That was the smoking gun that pointed at the music from the mouth of the man who had put a gun to his head. It didn't sound right. It didn't feel right. It seemed like there should be responsibility for putting in that kernel of encouragement to kill yourself.
When it transpired that the pair had been listening to Judas Priest that afternoon, the parents saw someone they could blame for the tragedy. Vance's parents and their legal team, headed by Nevada attorney Ken McKenna, subsequently alleged that a subliminal message of, quote, "do it," had been included in the song.
Discovered on the I did listen to the tape in the courtroom before and after he died. Do it. That had been implanted something on the record.
It was, you know, mobile. It's too deep. In my mind, he just killed himself. He just killed himself. Yeah. Put yourself in the record. Potentially for discussion.
The song in question was Better By You, Better Than Me. It is a 1969 song by the English rock band Spooky Tooth. The song appeared on the album Spooky 2 and was composed by American keyboardist Gary Wright. Judas Priest later covered the song, and the song itself was a last-minute addition to an album when CBS Recordings insisted on including another more commercial track to liven up an album on which a majority of the songs have a very dark and sinister undertone. It was recorded in a separate session with James Guthrie, as Dennis Mackay had moved on to other projects and was no longer available. The band was reportedly impressed with Guthrie's production as it stood in contrast to the overly thin, flat sound that had plagued their albums up to this point. They would actually ask him to produce their next album, Killing Machine.
McKenna and the boys' families focused on the lyrics of one song, Better By You, Better Than Me.
Isn't it ironic that of all the hundreds and hundreds of songs that Judas Priest wrote, they picked a song that we didn't write? It was written by this band called Spooky Tooth in the 70s.
Rob Halford was the lead singer of Judas Priest.
And the reason we recorded that song was because we wanted to try and get into the radio world.
It's in essence a ballad that says, I've been bad.
You could find a way to use my passion.
I've done bad things.
You listen to the blood flow in my veins.
And mother, I have hurt you by being a bad boy.
You hear the teaching of the wind. Tell her why I'm alive within. I can't find the words. My mind is dead.
So if I kill myself, I will rid you of your pain. And that will be a good thing.
I don't know what the guy was trying to say. It's about some bust-up with his girlfriend. That's in its simplest way how I view that song.
They alleged the command in the song triggered the suicide attempt. The 3-week trial was watched closely by the music industry and constitutional lawyers. In a pre-trial motion, the judge ruled that subliminal messages were incapable of being protected speech under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, since they were by definition not noticeable and thus could not perform part of a dialogue.
Beat of the music. We thought, oh, this will get thrown out because of that First Amendment issue.
Judge Whitehead was about to dismiss the case based on the First Amendment when McKenna showed up with a new plan.
I stopped the discussion about First Amendment and said we have a whole new ball game. We are suing because they have subliminals in the music. Subliminals caused them to take the acts they did.
This area of subliminal messages came up. We go, if this is subliminal, I want to hear it, you know, because I knew a little bit what a subliminal message was, but I had absolutely no interest in it other than, oh yeah, isn't that thing that they put a flash of a popcorn thing in a movie theater, and they'd make it, oh, I need some popcorn.
But Judge Whitehead found the subliminal message allegations credible enough to grant a trial.
Timothy Moore, who testified on Judas Priest's behalf, stated that the plaintiffs, led by McKenna, achieved a major victory in getting the case to trial in the first place. Now, the case was dismissed with the finding that any subliminal messages within the recording, should they actually exist, were not responsible for the suicides.
After 4 weeks of testimony, the case was now in the hands of Judge Whitehead.
Our life was on the line in some respects.
You try to be as objective as you can. You understand the risk. You understand, that it's out of your hands.
We did the best we could. We defended ourselves. We did all the right things.
I felt very confident that we were actually going to get everything in a judgment against them.
On August 24th, 1990, Judge Whitehead handed down the verdict.
Additional testimony came in to show that the duet was a combination of sounds from 2 tracks and not from 1. I think it was, in fact, a chance combination of sounds that made the word. I changed my mind.
First of all, I was relieved that he hadn't found for the prosecution.
I didn't want to lose.
But I was disappointed in the statement that he released.
I felt responsibility needed to be there.
But yeah, he'd heard these noises, but that he hadn't 100% exonerated the band Judas Priest.
But the lawsuit itself cost the band approximately $250,000 in legal costs, and the judge ordered CBS to pay $40,000 to the plaintiff's attorneys to reimburse them for costs related to bringing the lawsuit, since the label did not comply with discovery orders and provide master tapes of Stained Class to Vance's lawyers.
Metal band's music was not responsible for the suicide death of 2 young fans. Guitarist Glenn Tipton was not surprised.
There was no doubt in our mind at all. There was no doubt whatsoever at any point in time.
I accept it. I just really worry about the other kids out there that experiment with this, because he feels we didn't have enough scientific proof.
We took CBS and Judas Priest all the way. We've completed a trial on a case the experts said would have gotten picked off a long time ago.
You can listen to that music backwards and hear things if you want to. And it would be crazy for us to say you couldn't. But the finding that that the defendants did not intentionally put any subliminal messages on there, I think, is a complete vindication.
The suit claimed that subliminal messages in the Stained Class album and on the song Better By You, Better Than Me drove Raymond Belknap and James Vance to shoot themselves with a sawed-off shotgun in a Nevada playground in December of 1985. Belknap died instantly. Vance lived 3 years before succumbing to complications from the self-inflicted wounds. While Halford admitted that he had once recorded a backward message as an artistic experiment, the band strongly denied the existence of subliminal messages on the album.
The lyrics have never been bad, and there are no subliminal messages. There never have been.
And these cases that are brought against people such as ourselves have a vast background of reasons as to why these things happen, and they're nearly all related to the family environment. Nothing at all to do with the music.
In rejecting the $6.2 million suit, Judge Whitehead agreed that there was credible evidence that the victims had perceived a subliminal message, but that other factors prompted their suicide. The judge did, however, levy a $40,000 sanction against CBS Records for failing to produce the master tapes as evidence.
The trial itself was also the subject of a 1991 documentary entitled Dream Deceivers, the story behind James Vance versus Judas Priest. In the documentary, Judas Priest vocalist Rob Halford commented that if a band were so inclined to insert subliminal commands into their music, messages commanding their fans to kill themselves would be quite counterproductive. From the band's perspective, it would be much more practical to insert the command, "Buy more of our records." Chuck Schuldiner of the band Death wrote a song called Lack of Comprehension from their album Human about this incident. Now, 6 weeks after British rock group Judas Priest was absolved of causing the suicide-related deaths of 2 Sparks, Nevada youths, once again, fellow British rocker Ozzy Osbourne would face similar charges in Macon, Georgia. In 2 separate product liability cases that were being considered jointly in a deposition session in Macon federal court, subliminal messages allegedly hidden in Osbourne's albums are blamed for the suicide shootings of Michael Waller, who was 16, and Harold Hamilton, who was 17. In one case, Thomas Waller claims his son killed himself on May 3, 1986, after hearing a 1980 recording of the song Suicide Solution on the album Blizzard of Oz, the same song that was reportedly responsible for the death in the earlier case. Waller was trying to seek $1 million damages for pain and suffering, $3 million for wrongful death, and $5 million in punitive damages. The cases would not make it out of court, once again absolving the artist of any blame. These lawsuits led to dangerous and damaging accusations that no artist should be liable for, all under the guise and illusion and fear of a supposed entity named Satan. Going into the 90s, the Satanic Panic and heavy metal band accusations of being evil or worshipping Satan would just change shape and move continents. Black metal bands in Europe would take the spotlight off American bands by committing suicide, murders, hate crimes, and most notably, church burnings. Heinous acts that would make any American metal band look like Barney the Singing Dinosaur in comparison. The 2000s would be even less dramatic, with at most bands like Behemoth getting attention for attacking Christianity at every opportunity given by provoking Catholics and other religions alike. Even at the time of this recording, artists in non-metal genres like Lady Gaga are accused of promoting Satan to the masses. Hail Lady Gaga and hail Satan, I guess. So, all in all, I can conclude everything we went over and the events discussed with this.
What did we learn, Palmer?
I don't know, sir.
I don't fucking know either. I guess we learned not to do it again.
Yes, sir.
I'm fucked if I know what we did.
Yes, sir. It's hard to say.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Now you have all the secret knowledge you need.
Sure.